let me start by going over the cost structure for our different plans. It's free. Everything I'm about to talk about is free, and there's no premium plan. There's no special situation where you can't do it. In fact, what I'm going to show you with Data API Builder runs in Azure, but it also runs on Prim. It runs on AWS. It runs in Google. Wherever you want to run it, it's totally fine with us. And so it's open source. And here we go. Let me share my screen here and just kind of get you started about where. We'll circle back to this, but I want to make sure that you know where to go to find more information about Data API Builder. It is AKMS/DAB, Data API Builder. And so we call it DAB all the time because Data API Builder takes forever to be able to say. And so we've got this cute little logo, but there's far more to Data API Builder than this cute logo. And conceptually, where it belongs inside your solution or inside your application is in where your web API is. It doesn't necessarily replace your web API, but what it might do is supplement. Now, in many cases, it might actually replace everything. If all you're doing inside your web API is you're building CRUD operations against the database, then this could potentially replace everything. And it could take a third of your code base away. And when you think about the unit tests that you don't have to write and the complexity of your CI/CD pipeline that you don't have to implement, all of a sudden Data API Builder is spectacular. Now, we wrote it for the 4 Azure databases. That's Postgres, SQL Server, Cosmos DB, and MySQL. And so all of those can be hosted in Azure, of course, but they could also be hosted locally on your machine or in a server on your network or in some other cloud. And so we don't care. Wherever it is totally fine. There's no special hook in there to make sure that you're inside Azure. In fact, the whole goal is really to reduce the friction that developers feel when they're trying to integrate with a database. And so as many applications as we make, those applications are pretty cool. But until we introduce some sort of backend data store, those applications never can be like their full potential. And if you're building an enterprise application today, then the starting place is a data store. I mean, that's where you would begin before we'd even build the application. How hard is it then to integrate with that database? We want to make it as simple as possible. And so it's not a matter of, man, we don't like the SQL driver, and so we've made it so you don't have to use it. We don't like Entity Framework, so we've made it so you don't have to use it. That's not the point at all. The point is that if all you're doing is this repetitive, brainless stuff, then it makes plenty of sense for you to be able to use something that was written the way you would have written it. So the same type of technologies that you would have used, ASP.NET on the back, right? We're using the same frameworks as you are. We're writing the same code as you would write. And that's one of the benefits of us being open source. You can just look for yourself. There's nothing exotic here. It is basically the same repeatable, proven pattern that everybody is using for data access through a data API. And we're making it so that it's inside a single engine. Then that engine runs inside a container. And as a result, that one container needs nothing. It's not code generation. It's just executing inside the engine. And you provide it with a JSON file that indicates or describes your data source. So I'm using SQL Server, and these are the tables that I want. Now, getting started with DAB is pretty easy. It's a .NET tool, so you can say .NET Tools install Microsoft Data API Builder. But even then, there is a little bit of a burden to kind of understand what it is we want. And so what I wanted to show off today is the ability, or one of the family of extensions that we've added to Visual Studio Code to help developers get started. So it is crazy. You can go from 0 to hero in like a couple of seconds. Wait till you see it. You'll be like, this is ridiculous. And it is pretty cool. Now, let me just put a pin in it and let that be the exciting thing I'm about to show you. But before I do, I want to just kind of bring your attention to an applied skill that we have now inside Microsoft Learn to help you learn not just this, but all of the extra little innovations that have been added to SQL Server over the last few years. If you're a normal developer and you're familiar with SQL, but you don't know, but you haven't been keeping up with all the innovations that have been happening recently, this is the solution for you. So we've created an applied skill that steps you piece by piece all the way through, including Data API Builder, all the things you need to know in order to really take advantage of the capabilities now inside Azure SQL DB and those capabilities that are going to be shipping inside SQL Server 2025 at the end of the year. And so all of these things are like, how am I going to get my head wrap around this? Here's the way to do it. What's even better about an applied skill is when you take it, it's a little bit like an exam. When you take it, we provision a portion of Azure for you inside there, you prove that you do it. So it's not a bunch of questions on an exam. You actually show that you're able to do it. So it's a cool thing you can show off on LinkedIn or whatever it is you I don't know, however it is you show how smart you are. However, let's go back to the extension inside Visual Studio Code to help us get started. So this is really an add-on to Data API Builder. This isn't fundamentally the engine. Obviously, it's just meant to make it a really great experience for you. It's the Omnibus extension. There are many Data API Builder extensions inside Visual Studio Code. And you're like, which one do I need? You need this one. Just Data API Builder Omnibus. That's all of them together in one place. And so you'll get the right extensions, you'll get the right versions, and everything will lay out the way you expect it. So that's really, really great. But instead of talking about it, let me show it to you, because that's where it really kind of shines. So let me start with Visual Studio Code. I already have it installed. If I go over to my extensions here and I search for Omnibus, that's the easiest way to find it. Only 2 extensions in the marketplace use the word, so it makes it really easy to find. And so it's the Data Builder Omnibus. And so once you have it installed, you can see all the extensions that are added with it. So it just takes a second or two for them all to install. They're all very, very small extensions. And once you have it in place, then you can really go to town. So let me show you some of the things that you would do typically with the JSON file used for Data API Builder. And so we call that a dab config file. I don't know, I mean, what else are you going to call it? And so I have an empty folder here. When I right click it, I have the ability to start. So, right, so this is dab init. And so dab init is the normal CLI command that we use for Data API Builder to get started. So let me go ahead and say dab init. And this is basically saying, I don't have a configuration file. I'm starting from 0. And so it pops up and it says, how do you want to do this? And so there are some best practices, and those best practices may not fit your workflow. And so this is the option for you to use them or not use them. Let me just walk through what those are. The first one is whether or not your secrets are stored in an env file. This is particularly nice. We've supported env files for many versions. And it allows you basically to take the name value pair for your environment and to be able to put those into a file that you don't have to include in your repository, right? You can add it either with a git ignore so that it is not pushed up to your repository, or you can move it to another location, whatever makes sense to you. And so this sets this up for you. Say, do you want to use an env? I will, because it makes it really, really easy. Do you want to go ahead and generate the manifest for the .NET tool? So I may not have dab installed, but if I check this, then I'm going to go ahead and create the manifest that will install the dab tool for me. Right? So that's just a handy way to do it. So you might think, well, no, thanks, I don't really need that. That's fine. Right? We want to kind of meet where you are. The other thing is, we can deploy this easily into your solution, either running on a server or in its own container host service. It's sort of up to you what you want to do. This is a completely stateless engine, so you have a lot of architectural options. And you can go in and say static web app as well. So if you don't want to have Azure Kubernetes services or ACA or ACI or all the other ways of hosting a container, if you're like, I don't want to do that. Maybe you're not familiar with a container, or maybe you're just looking for a POC by lunch. And so you're like, what I really want to do is I want to do it in static web apps. Well, the structure and format of the dab config file doesn't change if you're using it in static web apps. However, the name of the file is required to be a certain name. So if I check this, then it'll automatically become or be written out to be in that name. That's the only change that's really there. Why do we do that? Well, frankly, every time I do something inside a static web app and I think about what this special name is, I forget it. And so I have to go to the docs. So for me, it's a lot easier just to check this box so I know I get the right thing. That's pretty neat. All right, so I'll use an env file. I'll uncheck everything else for now. I could have left it. It's not that big of a deal. And now it asks for the connection string into my database. Now, I'm running it inside Docker, right? So I have a, let me pull it up so I can show you. Right here's Docker running for me. I have SQL Server running. This is pretty handy. Not everybody knows SQL runs in a container. Not everybody knows SQL runs on Linux. And so it's a neat thing to be able to just kind of show that, kind of blows some people's minds. And so SQL's running there. I have the connection string, and well, I'll have to repeat my process here just a little bit, but I have the connection string. I'll leave everything checked as the default. I'll paste in my connection string in my, let's see, do I have it? So there we go. Beautiful. All right. It's just a standard connection string that goes into my container. You can copy my password and use it. Password. It's beautiful. And so I'll say go. And what's beautiful here is it is not doing something special. It is just running the command line, the dab command line that would have done it anyway. So if you're like, I wonder how I would do this if I didn't have it. Well, this is a really great way to be able to learn all the let's say the complexity around the command line to make sure you understand how to do it right. So you can see here that we ran dab init right here inside the terminal for you and passed in all the things you needed. And so if we look here at all the files that were created, that's because we left many of those things checked, right? The first is here's the manifest that will install the .NET tool for us. Here's the env file that will be setting our connection string for us inside the environment, but not just the environment, but inside the process scope of the environment. That means that no other application running will be able to use these values, right? So it's really, really nice. And then finally, I put a git ignore here because just in case you forget, and I want to make sure that you never accidentally check in and commit your env file into your repository. You can delete this if you have a .NET, if you have a .ignore file of your own. If you already had one in the folder, by the way, and you're worried that it might get erased, it doesn't. It just appends .env to your existing git ignore. If you already have an env file and you're worried that this will be erased, it also will not. It will be appended as well. So that's nice. It tries to make it so that you don't have to do it inside a empty or brand new folder, but if you do, this is how it looks. And so here's my configuration file. Just trust that everything is there the way you need it to be. And what's nice is I can right click on it. And now there's a lot more options than there were before. And so the first one I can go to is just validate. And what that does is it runs my connection file and sees whether or not the connection, it runs my configuration file and sees whether or not the connection string into SQL Server works or not. And so here you can see config is valid. That means all the JSON is valid, but also the connection string is valid. And now I can start to add my tables. That's where it really starts to matter because I'm trying to create an endpoint for my application so that I can interact with it either through REST or GraphQL. And so let me just right click here and say add, and I get to add here, let's say tables first. This list of tables comes from my database. The reason it comes from the database is because I have the connection string that you just provided to me. So I can go out and read it. And I can say, let's just take them all. I take all of these and say, okay. And it will add all of these to my configuration file for me. And it'll do it by what you would expect using the CLI command. So if I were to scroll up through my terminal here, I can see that dab add, and then it adds that table and how it adds the table. So if there's a mystery in your mind of like, how does all this command line work? Well, we just write it out for you so you can check it out yourself. And it's more straightforward than you think. But even if it were super duper easy and there was nothing to it, it's still more you have to type. It's really a neat way to get started. So all I've done so far is create the initial file and add tables to it. Truth of the matter is that's all I need. But let me right click on it and say visualize. So this will create a mermaid diagram that, let's see if I can hide that. It'll create a mermaid diagram to show you all the tables, views, and store procedures that you have inside your config file. You can use this visualize even if you created your config file some other way. And so now I can look at it and I'll be like, oh, there are all the tables. Look at that, those 6 tables that make up my database. Now, the truth is, these tables are related to each other, and we can bring in those relationships so that we can see and use them, right? So I can right click here and I can say add, but this time I'll choose relationships. It'll list all of the relationships that are relevant to the tables that are currently in my configuration file that are defined inside my database, right? So it's like basically saying, here are all the tables I have. Have you defined any relationships and could I use them? And so I'll just go ahead and select them all so I can show you what this does, right? And so it goes through and adds all the relationships using the command line like you would expect. I can right click on the JSON file again and say visualize. It updates that mermaid diagram so that, let me hide the and now you can see it's the same set of tables, but now the lines between them represent the relationship constraints that were in the database. This is really handy because now when I start to interact with these in my endpoint, I can have relationships between all of my entities. Now, we support both REST and GraphQL. So REST is very straightforward. In fact, let's go ahead and start this just so you can see what it looks like. I'll right click and this time I'll say start, right? All the dab commands are just sitting right there. So I'll say start, it opens up the terminal and it gave me an error right in the middle of my demo. That's terrific. Let me back up and see what's going on. I already have it running from a previous demo. All right, let's try it again. It's nice to know that I'm prepping. All right, I clicked dab start again after I stopped it from running from my previous window the terminal there. And anyway, so once it's running, you can see that it has both HTTP and HTTPS. And so I'll use HTTPS, but you can go either way. It's the same, right? One is just with or without a local certificate. And so let me pull down my browser that just opened. And at the root, it's just showing you that it is healthy. Now, this is exciting. We're about to release version 1.4. Next comes 1.5, of course. That's next month. And 1.4 is a bunch of just stability and bug fixes that should be out actually this week and maybe this morning, and which is really exciting. So you can see I'm running 1.3, so I don't have 1.4 just yet, and then 1.5 is coming. So 1.4 is our stability release. 1.5 will be our feature release. And so one of the things that's coming in our next feature release will be an entire health endpoint that will give you all kinds of information about connection thresholds and timing around your database and all your different endpoints. So remember, this is both Graph and REST. So let me go to Swagger just real quick. Oh, I put a dot instead. Let me go to /Swagger. Here we go. So Swagger and Banana Cake Pop both ship if you're in development mode of Data API Builder to allow you to test and interact with your endpoints. And so I have the actor table. So this is a database of Star Trek characters. And so if I go in and I go to get, which is the most basic of all of them, and I say, let's try this out. So I'm going to get all of the actors. I can execute it. And when I do, it returns there's William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, like you would expect, right? So what it's doing is the engine is querying the database, turning into JSON for you and passing it back. That means that your application now can interact with the database, doing all the CRUD operations. So you can still create, read, update, and delete, fully secure, cacheable, and everything else, all through HTTP and JSON, right? So it's beyond simple. So what framework do you need to make Data API Builder work? None. What language does it support? All of them. And I mean, it's just one of those kind of crazy scenarios where why wouldn't you add this for all the basic operations that you need? There's extensibility points. There's all kinds of things coming as well. And so it's really cool. But before I stop here, I want to just say, let me show you this last piece. This is REST, all the REST endpoints. And by the way, I could have said API/ACTOR, right? This is the same thing, and I can make it nice and nice looking. And this is the same as what was happening when I was in Swagger. I'm just going directly against that endpoint. It comes back as JSON that you can deserialize inside your application. However, I want to also show you Banana Cake Pop. And so if you haven't already seen it, Banana Cake Pop is the Swagger for Graph. That's really the best way of thinking of it. And so when I load up my Graph endpoint, which I just did, there's only one. So in REST, it's API/actor, API/character, API/series. In GraphQL, it's /GraphQL, nothing else. Everything is right there. And it allows you to bring back all of your entities. And it allows you also to deal with relationships between your entities. And not to get too far into GraphQL, I just want you to see how cool it is. I could just say, let's create a brand new query just real quick. And I could say, let's bring back the actors. Here's the actors. And items are column names in there. So I'll say, give me the name, and I'll run it. So just like before, wait, let's see. Actors, items, actors, items, actors, items, endpoint. All right, I don't want to get caught up on this. Maybe I have something else. It doesn't matter. What's great about it is, let me zoom in and just show you as I was building this application, or as I was building this query, what it was going to provide to me. So here I am selecting the birth year, the ID, the name, and this subsection right here is the character, right? That's because I have a relationship defined between the actor and the character. So then I can go in and say, don't just return the name of the actor, but also return the name of the character that he played. And beyond that, I could say, let's go into species. What species was that character? And so I can go on and on and on because these relationships have been defined by Data API Builder. And I can then build this like sophisticated query that might make more sense for the mobile application or the website that I'm about to show it on. All the way around, though, what's cool today is we're kind of really having a lot of fun by building just all of this productivity in Visual Studio Code for developers to be able to start from scratch. And let me do it one last time just to make the point of, if I had this connection string in my clipboard here. Let me delete everything that's there, close everything out that I have here, and start from scratch one more time. I say init, and I'll paste in the connection string. It already knows that the database is there. I'll right click and say, let's add some tables. I'll say go. I'll say now all the tables have been added to my configuration file. And the last thing I'll do is I'll right click and say start. Now I am up and going with a, except for, don't forget, if you already have it running, you have to close all the others. There we go. And so I'll right click and say start. And now I have my endpoint up and ready. I can do all of the creates, read, update, and delete I would want to do against my Postgres database, my SQL Server, or whatever it is that you're using. And so there's a lot of neat functionality here that comes like that. And so there was already friction using the database. We wanted to reduce that by having Data API Builder. And there was a little bit of friction using Data API Builder. We wanted to reduce that using these extensions inside Visual Studio Code. So try them out yourself. If you haven't already seen DAB, then try it out. You're going to love it. It's the repository is akms/dab. It'll take you here. And I want to invite you that at the very top of our README is a place where you can sign up and be part of our community. So as we go through our roadmap and we're trying to prioritize features in the future, we'll send it out to our community so they can help us prioritize and show things as well. So if you want to be part of the team, you can absolutely do it right there. We're not asking you to submit a pull request. We're just asking for your name and kind of asking what you're doing, because it's a neat set of stories of how different customers are using Data API Builder across from the largest, trust me, the largest enterprise you can imagine, to tiny little classroom scenarios where all you're doing is learning what serialization and deserialization means, and you can do that in your JSON application or in your JavaScript application or your C# application.